there is a huge degree of urgency in terms of the action right now.
It's the biggest review of military strategy since the Cold War was raging, and Indonesia was our biggest worry.
Let's not have any illusions about immediate threats. That's why our defence is important.
Australia will now scrap the defence principles in place since the Second World War.
The defence posture that we have had for the last few decades has served our nation well. But in the circumstances that we now face, that defence posture is no longer fit for purpose.
The Defence Strategic Review made public today, recommending a wholesale makeover to turn Australia into a strategic Indo-Pacific player.
We must build and strengthen our security by seeking to shape the future rather than waiting for the future to shape us.
The overhaul has 6 key priorities. Develop a nuclear-powered submarine capability, which is already underway. Beef up our long-range missile strike capabilities using Australian-made munitions. Shift more ADF resources to Northern Australia. Improve the utilisation of innovative technologies. Boost ADF recruitment and improve defence cooperation with our Pacific neighbours. The Army will scale back its fighting vehicle fleet.
It would be a pretty, frankly, flawed review that just added things on.
With $7.8 billion being reprioritised to boost Navy and Air Force firepower, the public version of this review is careful not to directly call out the country behind this new threat.
I'll name one and you just nod. China.
But says that nation's military expansion, its moves to control trade routes in the South China Sea, and its growing tensions with the US make it necessary for us to be more proactive.
We need a sovereign defence industrial base in this country if we are truly to be independent and sovereign and have supply chain resilience.
So, with our defence now taking a more offensive position, just how big a threat do we face, and are we up to the challenge?
Richard Marles is the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and he joins us now. Minister, this is such a radical reshaping of our defence forces and our strategic outlook, so why is this so urgent?
Well, we really face the most challenging set of strategic circumstances that we have in decades. Within our region, we're witnessing the biggest conventional military build-up that we have seen since the end of the Second World War. That doesn't happen for no reason. It shapes our landscape. And at the same time, our economic connection is much greater with the world today than it was back in the 1980s when we last assessed our strategic posture, which is what we've announced today. One example of that is that most of our liquid fuels today come from just one country by sea, and that's from Singapore. In the mid-90s, all of that was produced on shore. And so there's an obvious vulnerability associated with that. And we really do have a very difficult environment in which we're witnessing a very significant build-up of conventional military power. And so it's in that context that we need to make sure that we are as self-reliant as we can be.
Couple of things. Given that the urgency in the review, why will it take until 2024, Minister, for the strategy document to come out? And what's behind this Land 400 vehicles being cancelled? Is that just shifting money around because of the state of the budget?
Well, it is about trying to reprioritise the shape of our defence force so that we are thinking about what sort of a defence force we need for the posture that we want. I mean, what we've really done today is retask the mission of the Australian Defence Force for the first time in 35 years. And a lot of that is to make sure that we have a much greater ability to project, that we can, the language is to hold an adversary at risk further from our shores. But what that really means is that anyone that was seeking to impact our connection, our economic connection with the world, say our sea trade, for example, that we can give them pause for thought. Now, that means there are certain capabilities that we need, there are others we don't need as much. And so in terms of the armoured fighting vehicles, that was an example where we felt that we could reduce the number of those vehicles that we were planning to produce, and with the money that we get from that, enable us to have a much greater projection through longer range missiles, for example, an ability to transport our army as another example. But the focus here is thinking about ways in which we can have a much greater projection to protect our Australia's interests, because so many of them lie beyond our shores.
Minister, can you, if we use that example, can you answer clearly, if that happened today, you know, another country, let's just say it's China, tries to seize control of a shipping lane that we need to get all of the fuel you're talking about, could Australia do anything to prevent that right now?
Well, the way in which we do something to prevent that, Hamish, is by giving an adversary who was minded to do that a reason to have pause for thought.
Yeah, sure,
and
which is why I asked the question, if we need to radically reshape our strategy in order to do that, does that mean that right now we can't?
I guess if the question is, do we have capabilities which project today in 2023, we do. Collins-class submarines are an example of that, but they're a really good example of why we need to be thinking about what the future looks like, because that's a capability that we understand by virtue of it being a diesel-electric powered submarine is one which is going to diminish as we go through the 2030s and into the 2040s.
So is there any country other than China that might do exactly what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, when we talk about the large military build-up, it is China which is engaged in that military build-up, but we're also living in a world where you see other powers like North Korea, which are operating in a range of domains, including cyberspace. We've obviously seen what's happened with Russia in terms of Ukraine. I mean, all of this speaks to a world in which the global rules-based order is more under threat now than it's been for some time. And for an island trading nation like Australia, where so much of our national income comes from the way in which we connect to the world and engage with the world, we're deeply invested, more than most countries, in the rules of the road being abided.
I get the review and why it was needed, but what I don't get, Richard, what's Defence been doing all these years, buying all this stuff we didn't need? Why did we need a review to tell us that we didn't need land vehicles and we needed missiles? I mean, it seems that they've been sitting around, a lot of highly paid generals, doing bugger all.
Oh, look, I don't think that's completely fair, Steve, but a review is actually the process by which you get exactly that information and which enables government to be able to make the decisions that we are now making. Look, the posture that we've had over the last 30 years, which has essentially, and very crudely as I simplify it, been defending the continent, being able to be a significant player within our region and being a good global citizen, 3 concentric circles, if you like. I mean, that has served us well. And what we've sought to have with our Defence Force over the journey is what's described as a balanced Defence Force, meaning one that has the capability to operate in each of those circles. So we've been able to defend our country. We've been able to lead a mission such as in East Timor or Solomon Islands. We've been able to play our part in a multinational mission in Afghanistan or Iraq. But as we think about the future, we have a much more focused issue that we need to respond to and a much more focused mission for the Australian Defence Force. And that's why we've done this review, to put ourselves in a position where we can articulate a retasking of the Australian Defence Force, which we've done today, and to then make a set of decisions which will start right now, but in truth will go over the next decade, which will reshape the Defence Force to give expression to the posture that we've described today.
OK, Minister, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Sarah.
Let's check today's top stories. And a sickening fall has claimed the life of a Group 1 winning jockey at a country race meet in Victoria. Dean Holland was thrown from his horse when it veered suddenly and crashed through the inside rail at Donald this afternoon. The 34-year-old father of 4 was treated on the track by paramedics but died at the scene. Another jockey also fell but escaped injury. The meet was abandoned and racing's been called off in Victoria tomorrow. A 26-year-old man's been charged with the murder of a Sydney father outside a gym in the city's west last month. Police alleged he was involved in the ambush on Tahar Sabah and helped the gunman escape. He's not accused of pulling the trigger. He was arrested at Sydney Airport yesterday, about to board a plane to Vietnam. He hasn't applied for bail and will face court again next month. Anyone who was up early in Tassie this morning was treated to a spectacular display of the Southern Lights. Aurora Australis watchers say it was one of the best displays they've ever seen. It was also visible in parts of Victoria. One Aurora watcher says seeing it makes them feel lucky to be alive. Conditions are good for an encore tomorrow morning. And the only person who should wear white to a wedding is the bride. That's according to an etiquette expert who's weighed in on the debate over a US politician's choice of dress for her daughter's nuptials. Nikki Haley was roasted after posting this pic. Wow. But she claims the dress was gold. The expert says guests shouldn't wear any outfit that draws focus away from the happy couple. That includes cream, ivory or beige.
If you ask the bride, because some people get weird about it. I personally wouldn't be weird about it.
You should try and steer very clear away from wearing any shade of white.
I think that's just like unspoken, isn't it? You just don't do it.
I think weddings are ridiculous, so yes, I think it's fine. Wear white.
Cream, ivory or beige, that rules out Richie Benno.
I know. I mean, also he's dead. That
Oh,
probably
that's
rules
another
him
thing,
out.
yeah. Helpful when you want to keep costs down,
Of
you know?
course, yeah. A mankini's okay? Is that if I wear a mankini? That's
I think
all
that
right?
would be unusual.
Yeah.
Are you really wanting to?
No,
wear
but I'm
it?
just saying, it's like you could wear other things that would be like white is way better than.
Yeah, I mean, don't wear a white one.
A white mankini.
What happens if the bride isn't wearing a white wedding dress? Have you got a restriction then?
Some people get really funny about it, but I don't care. Care. Do you care? You're walking down the aisle pretty soon.
You're wearing a white dress?
A mankini, perhaps.
Are you wearing a white blazer?
Let's move on.
I didn't realise you were encroaching some private.
Yeah.
Can I come to the wedding?
Not if you keep behaving.
It's time for more of today's top stories and big changes ahead for Australia's military. A strategic review's concluded it's not fully fit for purpose. As a result, the federal government plans to overhaul the Army, Air Force and Navy to counter any rising threats in our region at a cost of $19 billion. Earlier tonight, Defence Minister Richard Marles told the project that includes upgrading our defence assets and acquiring long-range strike missiles.
What we've really done today is retask the mission of the Australian Defence Force for the first time in 35 years. And a lot of that is to make sure that we have a much greater ability to project, that we can, the language is to hold an adversary at risk further from our shores.
The South Australian Aussie rules community is reeling after the shock death of a young country footballer. Antonio Loya Kono was critically injured in an on-field collision on Saturday. Tragically, the 20-year-old died in hospital yesterday after being taken off life support. It's understood the Birdwood footballer had already suffered a number of concussions in his playing career.
Accidents happen in contact sport all the time, and no one ever expects it to result in a loss of life.